Rasheeda Blake had always trusted her instincts. Years of service as a U.S. Navy SEAL had honed them, sharpened them until they were as natural as breathing. It wasn't arrogance that guided her every move, but caution, the kind of alertness that kept her alive in a world where danger often lurked just beyond the corner. And today, she could feel it, the weight of it in the air, the subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. It wasn't the usual sight of joggers, dog walkers, and kids playing in the park that caught her attention. No, today the park was quieter than usual. The shadows from the trees stretched long across the walking path, creating a sense of isolation. Rasheeda's jog had taken her through this park 100 times before, but something felt different. She slowed her pace, the rhythmic sound of her shoes against the gravel becoming more deliberate, her steps more careful. Her breath steady, she glanced around, scanning the area. There, 3 men, sitting on a bench near the far side of the park. They didn't belong there. Rasheeda wasn't paranoid, but her gut told her something wasn't right. They weren't chatting or people-watching. They were watching her. She met their gaze briefly, just long enough to confirm the suspicion that gnawed at her. She kept moving, eyes darting to the side where a small group of teenagers were gathered, too engrossed in their phones to notice her. Then, without warning, the men on the bench stood. The tallest of them, a burly figure with a scruffy beard and tattered jeans, stretched his arms above his head as he started walking toward her. Rasheeda didn't stop, but her hand instinctively went to the small knife she kept concealed in the waistband of her shorts. "Excuse me, miss," the man called out, his voice too smooth, too casual. Rasheeda's steps didn't falter, but she quickened them, listening to the soft crunch of gravel beneath her feet. She was being followed now. She could hear the footsteps behind her, a heavy, methodical pace that didn't belong in a park on a Sunday afternoon. Her heartbeat picked up, but her posture remained relaxed. No need to let them know they had her attention just yet. She pivoted sharply, turning around to face the man. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm, controlled. The man grinned, a wicked, unsettling smile. "Just thought we'd have a little chat." Rasheeda's eyes locked on him as he closed the distance. She watched his hands, saw how his fingers twitched. He was making a move, but she was already ahead of him. Before he could even get within arm's reach, Rasheeda moved. In a blur of motion, she stepped to the side, using his momentum against him. Her arm shot out, grabbing his wrist and twisting it behind his back with enough force to make him gasp. He tried to fight back, but he was too slow. The other 2 men, who had been hanging back, rushed forward, but Rasheeda was already turning to meet them head-on. The first man was a blur. She kicked his knee hard, dropping him to the ground, his face contorting in pain. The second man tried to grab her from behind, but Rasheeda ducked under his arm, spun, and slammed her elbow into his ribs. He staggered backward, groaning. "Not so tough now, are you?" Rasheeda muttered, her voice low but steady. They were on the ground now, moaning, clutching at limbs they had clearly never expected to be used against them. "Get up," one of them shouted weakly, but Rasheeda wasn't finished. She grabbed the leader by his collar and lifted him off the ground, her strength overwhelming him as she brought him face to face with her. "You're done. And if I ever see you again, I won't be so kind." The man's eyes widened in fear. "You don't know who you're messing with, lady." "I don't care," Rasheeda cut him off, dropping him back to the ground. "You came after the wrong person." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her steps calm as if nothing had happened. She didn't stop to look back. The men were too dazed, too shocked to do anything more than curse under their breath. But Rasheeda's mind was already working faster than her feet. They had been too quick to react, too eager to close in on her. This wasn't a random act of violence. No, she could feel it. This had been planned. As she rounded the corner of the park, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Sarah, her friend, and a journalist with a knack for digging up the truth. "Are you okay?" "Heard something went down in the park." Rasheeda read the message and paused for a moment. She wanted to reply with something simple. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little confrontation." But that wasn't the truth. Not at all. Instead, she typed out something different. "They tried to attack me. And I don't think it was just random. Something's off. I'll fill you in later." She hit send and continued walking, the weight of what had just happened settling in. This wasn't some random act of street crime. She was being targeted, and she would find out why. The next morning, Rasheeda stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her jacket as she prepared for another day of trying to piece together the mystery that had followed her since the attack. Her reflection stared back at her, calm and composed, but inside, the unease lingered. Something about the encounter in the park didn't sit right with her. She had dealt with threats before, had faced down more dangerous enemies in her military career, but this felt personal. Her phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Sarah. "Meet me at the diner in an hour. I've got news." Rasheeda felt a surge of both hope and anxiety. Sarah had been digging into the attack, trying to uncover anything that might explain why she was targeted. Rasheeda knew the journalist's sharp mind and relentless drive would bring them closer to the truth, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that whatever they uncovered was only going to get worse. An hour later, Rasheeda walked into the diner, the familiar smell of coffee and bacon filling the air. Sarah was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her laptop open in front of her. She waved Rasheeda over, her eyes lighting up with a mix of excitement and concern. "Good morning, Detective," Sarah greeted with a grin as Rasheeda slid into the booth across from her. Rasheeda raised an eyebrow. "You already got something?" Sarah nodded, her fingers tapping on the keyboard as she brought up a file on the screen. "I've been digging through police reports, talking to sources, and, well, let's just say I found something that might answer a few questions." Rasheeda leaned in, her interest piqued. "What did you find?" "First things first," Sarah began, her fingers pausing above the keys. "I cross-referenced your attack with similar incidents over the past few months. The pattern is clear. There's been a rise in racially motivated attacks in this area. Vandalism, intimidation, harassment, you name it." Rasheeda's brow furrowed. "So this wasn't just a random act of violence?" Sarah shook her head. "No, these attacks are coordinated. And the group behind them? They're not new. They've been operating for a while, but it looks like they've gotten bolder." Rasheeda sat back, processing the information. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a cold shiver down her spine. "Who's behind it?" "That's the tricky part," Sarah replied, clicking through a few more pages. "There's this group, Hank's gang. They've been responsible for a lot of the recent attacks. But what's concerning is that they're connected to something bigger. A network of similar hate groups in the area. They're not just targeting random people, they're systematically driving minorities out of certain neighborhoods. The more I look into it, the more I realize we're dealing with a larger, well-organized operation." Rasheeda's fists clenched under the table, the weight of the situation pressing on her. "And these guys, Hank and his crew, how are they connected to all this?" "They're one of the smaller factions, but they've got a lot of influence," Sarah explained. "They're using violence and intimidation to push people out, but it's not just about that. It's also about property, real estate, and that's where things start to get interesting." Rasheeda's eyes narrowed. "Real estate?" Sarah nodded. "Yeah, there's been a lot of redevelopment happening in these areas where the attacks are most concentrated. New condos, luxury apartment complexes, stuff like that. And the people who are behind it? Well, they stand to make a lot of money if they can drive out the current residents." Rasheeda leaned in, her tone sharp. "So, they're using these attacks as a means of gentrification?" "Exactly," Sarah said, clicking on another file. "And it doesn't stop there. I think there's someone else pulling the strings here. Someone bigger than Hank. Someone who's funding these operations, keeping everything running smoothly. I don't think Hank's the top dog in this. He's just one piece of the puzzle." Rasheeda thought for a moment, absorbing the gravity of what Sarah was saying. "So, we're not just dealing with random hate groups. This is organized, and it's about money, real estate, power." "Yeah," Sarah replied. "And if I'm right, whoever's behind this is dangerous. But I don't have enough to go on yet." Rasheeda took a deep breath, her mind working quickly. "Then we need to dig deeper. We need to figure out who's financing all of this. If we can find that, we'll have the person who's truly behind it." Sarah nodded, her eyes focused. "I agree, but we need to be careful. These people are dangerous. And whoever they are, they've got the resources to make sure they stay out of the public eye." Rasheeda sat back in her seat, her fingers tapping lightly against the table as she considered their next move. "We're not going to let them get away with this. We're going to expose whoever's behind this. And when we do, they'll have nowhere to hide." Later that afternoon, Rasheeda took a walk around the area where the attacks had been happening. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The same neighborhoods Sarah had mentioned, places that had been marked for gentrification, felt different now, as if something had shifted under the surface. She could see the signs of change. New developments rising, construction crews working late into the evening, all while longtime residents were displaced. It was unsettling. As Rasheeda walked through the streets, she kept her eyes open for any signs that might connect the dots between these neighborhoods, the attacks, and the shadowy figure Sarah suspected was financing it all. It wasn't long before she caught a glimpse of something suspicious. A man in a suit, too clean for this part of town, talking to one of the workers at a construction site. She couldn't hear the conversation, but the man's body language was clear. He was in charge. Rasheeda's pulse quickened. She recognized him. She had seen his name on a list Sarah had compiled. Hendricks Construction. This was it. She was getting closer. The afternoon sun dipped low, casting an amber hue over the streets as Rasheeda made her way back to Sarah's apartment. Her mind was buzzing with everything they had uncovered so far. Each piece of the puzzle was falling into place, but the picture was more disturbing than she could have imagined. As she approached Sarah's door, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart sinking as she saw the message. The construction site. Meet me there. It's bigger than we thought. Without hesitation, Rasheeda headed straight for the location Sarah had texted her. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was unfolding pressing down on her with each step. The construction site was just a few blocks away, tucked behind a row of old, dilapidated buildings. The area was in the middle of being redeveloped, empty lots and abandoned buildings slowly being replaced by shiny, modern apartments. Rasheeda could feel the change in the air, the kind that only came with gentrification, the kind that pushed people out to make way for the wealthy. When she arrived, she found Sarah standing near the entrance, her phone in hand, looking around nervously. Rasheeda approached her quietly, not wanting to attract attention. "You okay?" Rasheeda asked in a low voice. Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "I've been following the money. There's more going on here than just a bunch of rogue hate groups." She glanced over her shoulder, making sure no one was listening. Hendricks Construction isn't just about building apartments. It's a front for something much larger, money laundering, to be specific. Rasheeda's eyes widened. Money laundering? How deep does this go? Deep, Sarah replied. I found connections between Hendricks and several shell companies. The construction projects are being used to funnel dirty money through fake property deals, and it all leads back to Hank's group. They're funding the hate groups, the intimidation tactics. It's all about control. They're trying to scare minorities into leaving so they can buy up cheap properties and flip them. Rasheeda clenched her fists. So they're not just terrorizing people for fun. They're doing it to make a profit. They're driving people out so they can gentrify these neighborhoods. Exactly, Sarah said. And there's more. The real estate deals go through Hendricks companies, but the money flows through a series of banks and offshore accounts. It's a well-oiled machine, Rasheeda. And Hendricks is the man at the center of it all. Rasheeda's jaw tightened. So he's the one pulling the strings. But why the hate groups? Why use them? Sarah looked at her, her eyes narrowing. It's not just about the money. It's about fear. Hendricks needs the fear to drive people out. He needs the intimidation to get the real estate deals through. The more chaos they create, the easier it is to buy up the land for pennies on the dollar. Rasheeda ran a hand through her hair, trying to process everything. This wasn't just a fight for justice anymore. It was a battle against a well-funded, deeply embedded system that used fear and violence to gain power and wealth. So we take him down, Rasheeda said, her voice steady, but her determination clear. We start with Hendricks. We bring him to the light. Sarah nodded, but there was a hesitation in her eyes. It's not going to be that easy. Hendricks is untouchable. He's got connections everywhere, politicians, business leaders, even law enforcement. It's going to take more than just a couple of journalistic exposes to bring him down. Rasheeda knew that. She knew they would need more than just information. They would need evidence, strategy, and an army of people willing to stand up and fight. But it wasn't just the fight against Hendricks that was on her mind. It was the realization that this wasn't just one man or one group. They were facing a whole network, a system that had been operating in the shadows for far too long. She looked over at Sarah, her voice resolute. Then we find people who can help us take him down. We build a case. We make sure the world sees what he's doing. They spent the next few hours walking through the construction site, talking to workers, inspecting documents, and collecting any piece of evidence that could tie Hendricks to the larger network. It was slow, tedious work, but with every step, Rasheeda felt the walls of this operation coming down. They weren't just going after a hate group. They were going after the people who were fueling it all. As night fell, They finally made their way back to Sarah's apartment, exhausted but determined. They sat down at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and printouts, piecing together the final bits of the puzzle. "I think I've got something," Sarah said, her voice filled with excitement. "I found a wire transfer that connects Hendricks Construction to a bank in the Cayman Islands. It's a huge transfer, Rasheeda, and it happened just days before the most recent attacks." Rasheeda leaned in, her eyes scanning the document. "This is it," she said softly. "This is the smoking gun. We can use this to get him." They both knew the risk. Going after someone like Hendricks meant drawing the attention of powerful enemies. But it was a risk they had to take. For the communities being targeted. For the people who had suffered in silence for too long. "This is just the beginning," Rasheeda said, standing up and grabbing her jacket. "We'll go to the police, to the press. We'll make sure everyone knows what's really happening." As she left Sarah's apartment that night, Rasheeda felt the weight of the fight ahead of her. The battle was far from over, but she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The tension in the air was palpable as Rasheeda sat at the small cafe, waiting for Sarah. She was beginning to feel the weight of the investigation, the feeling that the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. But there was no turning back now. They had already uncovered too much. The truth was out there, and Rasheeda wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. She scrolled through the files on her phone, reviewing the evidence they'd gathered so far. Sarah had been working tirelessly on connecting the dots, finding the paper trail that would lead them straight to Hendricks, the mastermind behind the network of hate groups. But Rasheeda knew that Hendricks was only one piece of the puzzle. Someone else, someone higher up, was pulling the strings. Rasheeda's mind drifted back to the construction site. Hendricks had been too clean, too controlled. There was no way someone like him was operating alone. He had resources, connections that kept him shielded from the law. He was part of something much larger, and Rasheeda's gut told her that the real power was still hidden in the shadows. The door of the cafe opened, and Sarah walked in, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Rasheeda. She made her way over to the table, a folder in hand. "Hey," Sarah said, her voice low, a look of both excitement and frustration on her face. "I found something. It's bigger than we thought." Rasheeda took the folder from Sarah and flipped it open. Inside were detailed reports on Hendricks, his company, and a list of contacts and business dealings. At first glance, it looked like more of the same: construction projects, real estate deals, the typical dealings of a business magnate. But Sarah had highlighted certain names and numbers, connections that didn't seem to belong in the legitimate world. "Who are these people?" Rasheeda asked, pointing to a series of names connected to Hendricks in the documents. Sarah leaned in, her eyes scanning the paper. "These are the key players behind the real estate development. But there's one name that stands out. Take a look." Rasheeda's gaze followed Sarah's finger as it landed on a name: Jonathan Brooks. The name wasn't familiar, but something about it sent a chill down her spine. "Who's Jonathan Brooks?" Rasheeda asked. Sarah hesitated before answering. "He's a businessman, but not the kind you usually hear about. He's connected to a larger network of investors, people who don't just fund development projects. They fund operations like the ones we're investigating. I found records linking him to the money laundering and hate group funding. He's the one financing everything behind the scenes." Rasheeda's pulse quickened. "So Hendricks is working for him." "Not just working for him," Sarah said. "Brooks is the one pulling the strings. Hendricks might be the face, the public figure, but Brooks is the power behind the curtain. He's the one with the money, the influence, and the connections that keep everything running smoothly." Rasheeda stared at the name, her mind racing. Jonathan Brooks. He was the key, the person who had been keeping Hendricks and his operation afloat. But finding him wasn't going to be easy. If Brooks was as connected as Sarah's research suggested, getting close to him would be like stepping into the lion's den. "We need to find him," Rasheeda said, her voice determined. "If we can get to Brooks, we'll have the proof we need to bring this whole thing down." Sarah nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "I've been trying to trace his movements, but he's like a ghost. There's very little public information on him, and the people who know him aren't talking." "Then we find a way to make them talk," Rasheeda said firmly. "There's always a way. We just need to think smart." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah continued her research, uncovering more about Jonathan Brooks' shadowy network. She spoke to sources, pieced together financial records, and dug through government filings. But it was slow progress. Every lead they found seemed to lead to a dead end. Rasheeda, however, had another idea. She knew that Hendricks' construction sites would be heavily guarded, security was tight, and no one outside the company would get close without raising suspicion. But Brooks wasn't a construction mogul. He was a businessman with ties to the criminal world, which meant he had a different set of interests. Rasheeda reached out to a few old contacts from her time in the military, people who could get her access to the kind of information she needed to get close to Brooks. One of them, a hacker named Marcus, agreed to help her. He had a reputation for getting things done quickly, and Rasheeda was counting on him. That night, Rasheeda met Marcus at a small, discreet cafe on the outskirts of town. She could see him before he even sat down, his face hidden behind a pair of sunglasses, his hands steady as he placed a laptop on the table. "Rasheeda," Marcus said with a nod. "I hear you need something." "Yeah," she replied, leaning in. "I need to find Jonathan Brooks. And I need to find him fast." Marcus's fingers danced across the keyboard, his eyes focused on the screen. "Shouldn't be too hard. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." Minutes passed, and the tension in the air thickened. Rasheeda didn't take her eyes off Marcus as he worked, her thoughts racing. This was it, the tipping point. If they could find Brooks, they could finally unravel the entire operation. Then Marcus stopped typing. He looked up at Rasheeda, a small smirk on his face. "Got him. Brooks is staying at a private estate on the outskirts of the city. Looks like he's got a few meetings lined up this week." Rasheeda's eyes narrowed. "Perfect. Let's go." As Rasheeda drove toward the estate, her mind was fully focused on what lay ahead. They were getting closer to the heart of the operation. Jonathan Brooks was within reach, and once they had him, the entire network would begin to unravel. The stakes had never been higher, and Rasheeda was more determined than ever to bring the man behind it all to justice. Rasheeda's heart pounded as she parked her car a few miles from the private estate. The place was secluded, high walls, dense trees, and security cameras that dotted the perimeter like silent sentinels. She knew this wouldn't be easy. Jonathan Brooks had to be careful. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a criminal mastermind hiding in plain sight. He was smart enough to protect himself, but Rasheeda had dealt with tough adversaries before. She wasn't going to let him slip away. The estate loomed ahead, an opulent mansion that screamed wealth and power. It was just the kind of place someone like Brooks would hide in, isolated, with a constant stream of high-level meetings and private dealings. His connection to Hendricks and the hate groups had been exposed, but now it was time to catch him in the act. Rasheeda reached for her earpiece. "Marcus, you've got eyes on the estate?" The voice of her hacker friend came through crisp and clear. "Yeah, I've got you covered. There's a security guard at the front gate, but nothing too heavy around the back. I've hacked into their surveillance feeds. Give me a minute. I'll loop the cameras so you can get in unnoticed." Rasheeda gave a small nod, a silent thank you as she slipped into the shadows and made her way to the back of the estate. The mansion had once been a beautiful, sprawling home, but now it looked more like a fortress that held the man responsible for the network of hate, fear, and manipulation that was tearing apart the very fabric of their community. She crouched by the back door, listening for any sounds of movement inside. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. She reached for the lock and, with a soft click, was inside. The house smelled of polished wood, leather, and money. Rasheeda's steps were quiet, deliberate. She moved deeper into the house, her mind focused on one thing, finding Jonathan Brooks. "Marcus, I'm in," she whispered into her earpiece. "Where is he?" "Second floor, third door to the left," Marcus replied. "I'm tracking his movements now. He's in a meeting, but it won't be long." Rasheeda's grip tightened on the gun she carried as she silently ascended the staircase. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made you feel like you were walking through a museum, something cold and distant, void of any warmth or life. When she reached the second floor, she slowed her pace, her footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. She could hear voices ahead, men speaking in low tones. Her heart quickened. This was it. She paused outside the third door on the left, pressing her ear to the cool wood. It was a tense conversation. From what she could gather, they were discussing recent developments in the real estate projects. But something was off. The tone was too sharp, too tense, and Rasheeda could tell that whatever Brooks was planning next, it wasn't just about properties anymore. A name surfaced in the conversation, Hendricks. And the words, "escalate the pressure," echoed through the door. Rasheeda's gut twisted. She had suspected that Hendricks wasn't the end of this operation, but now she was hearing it from the mouth of the man who had been funding it all. Jonathan Brooks wasn't just a businessman. He was the one who had made all of this possible. He had used Hendrix as a pawn, pulling the strings from the shadows. She had to move. Now. Rasheeda kicked the door open with precision, the force sending it crashing against the wall. 3 men inside, their eyes widening in surprise, turned to face her. One of them, Brooks, stood by the large desk at the center of the room. He was tall, clean-cut, dressed in a crisp suit that screamed wealth. He had the kind of face that belonged on a magazine cover, sharp jawline, ice blue eyes, but there was something cold about him, something calculating. "Who the hell are you?" one of the men shouted, lunging for the gun he kept on the desk. But Rasheeda was faster. She moved with the precision of a well-trained soldier, her hand reaching for her own weapon in one swift motion. The man never got a chance to aim. He collapsed to the floor, unconscious, before he could even pull the trigger. "Put your hands where I can see them," Rasheeda barked, keeping her eyes trained on Brooks. Brooks didn't flinch. He merely regarded her with cold amusement, as though she were some kind of nuisance. "You're making a mistake. You have no idea who I am," he said, his voice smooth but laced with venom. Rasheeda's jaw tightened. "I know exactly who you are. And I know what you've been doing." The other 2 men in the room exchanged a glance, their hands hovering near their waistbands, but neither of them made a move. They were clearly intimidated, but they weren't yet ready to surrender. Brooks took a step forward, his eyes locking with Rasheeda's. "You think you can stop me? You're just one person. I've built this empire from the ground up. You can't bring it down with a few accusations." "Watch me," Rasheeda replied coldly, stepping closer. "This isn't about just you. It's about the people you've been hurting, the communities you've been trying to erase. It's over." Brooks' eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place. Was it fear? Or was it something more calculating? Before she could react, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. "Do you think I'm really that easy to catch?" Brooks smirked, pressing a button on the device. The room suddenly erupted into chaos. The lights flickered, then went out entirely, plunging them into darkness. Rasheeda's heart raced as she instinctively crouched low, her senses heightened. She heard a scuffling sound, a door opening, and then closing rapidly. "Don't move," she ordered, her voice sharp, but it was already too late. Brooks was gone. Rasheeda's eyes darted to the door. It had been a trap. Brooks had anticipated her move. He had a way out, and now he was slipping through her fingers. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath, reaching for her phone. "Marcus, where is he? Where did he go?" Marcus' voice crackled through her earpiece, but it was faint. "He's gone. I lost the signal. I'm sorry, Rasheeda, he's too good. He knows how to disappear." But Rasheeda wasn't ready to give up. Not now. She could feel the walls closing in, but she wasn't backing down. Not when she was this close to the heart of it all. Rasheeda's breath came in heavy bursts as she stood in the darkness of the room, her hands still gripping the gun, her mind racing. The silence was thick, oppressive. The lights were out, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of her own heartbeat in her ears. "Damn it, Marcus," she muttered, pressing her back against the wall. She didn't know where Brooks had gone, or how he had managed to escape so quickly. But she wasn't about to let him get away. Not now. Not after everything she had uncovered. She was so close to ending this nightmare. Her fingers brushed the edge of her phone, still clenched in her hand. She hit the power button, trying to reset the connection, but there was no use. The security cameras had been disabled. Brooks had planned this escape, and he'd done it with precision. "Marcus, you there?" she said into the earpiece, trying again. The silence stretched on before she heard his voice crackle back through the device. "Yeah, I'm here. I lost his signal after he pressed that button. The estate's locked down. I've tried everything, but the network's been cut." Rasheeda exhaled slowly. "I can't believe this. He's still out there, Marcus." "I know, Rasheeda. I'm sorry. I've tried everything I can. He's too smart. He'll be lying low for a while." "No," Rasheeda's voice was hard, unwavering. "This ends now. Find him. He's got to be in the city. He's not going to hide forever." "Got it. I'll keep looking." Rasheeda hung up and stood motionless, letting the darkness consume her for a moment. She could feel the weight of failure pulling at her, but she refused to let it break her. She had come too far, uncovered too much, to let Brooks slip away now. Her mind raced through the possibilities. He had to have somewhere he was hiding, somewhere safe, somewhere no one would think to look. But Brooks had already proven he was steps ahead, anticipating every move she made. Rasheeda scanned the room again, looking for anything she might have missed. The desk was a mess of papers, real estate contracts, financial statements. But there was one thing that caught her eye. A thin file tucked in the corner of the desk, barely noticeable under a stack of documents. She approached it cautiously, her fingers brushing the edge of the file as she pulled it out. The file wasn't as neat as the others. It looked personal. Rasheeda opened it, flipping through the pages quickly. There were photographs, maps, addresses, handwritten notes, but it wasn't until she reached the last page that something truly caught her attention. A list. A list of names, all connected by one common thread: Hendricks Construction. Rasheeda's mind clicked into overdrive as she scanned the names. They were all high-ranking individuals, key players in the city's political and real estate circles. Brooks had been using Hendricks to fund and fuel his network of hate groups, but the real kicker was this list. It was clear that these people were involved. They were working with him. They were part of the operation. Rasheeda's fingers traced the names on the page, and one name stood out: Michael Foster, the mayor of the city. Her stomach turned. She had suspected political connections, but this was bigger than she thought. Brooks wasn't just manipulating the real estate market. He had political power behind him. And with that kind of influence, there was no telling how far this corruption went. Her mind spun with the realization. They've been working together, covering each other's backs. This is bigger than just a few hate groups. Rasheeda quickly snapped a photo of the list and sent it to Sarah, hoping the journalist could help piece together the connections. As she pocketed the phone, she heard a faint sound from outside the room, a soft rustling. Rasheeda tensed, her body going rigid. Someone was coming. Her instincts kicked in. She darted toward the window, peeking through the blinds. Two figures stood near the entrance to the mansion. They weren't wearing uniforms, but their body language spoke volumes. They were security, and they were heading straight for the room she was in. Rasheeda didn't hesitate. She grabbed the file, shoved it into her bag, and made for the back door, her feet moving silently across the marble floors. She had to get out. If she was caught now, everything she had uncovered would be lost. She slipped out the back, her breath coming in shallow bursts as she crouched behind a row of bushes. Her car was parked a few blocks away, but she knew she couldn't take it. Brooks would be watching the streets. She had to move fast, stay out of sight. As she slipped through the shadows, her phone buzzed again. "Sarah, we've got a problem." Rasheeda's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "Foster's office just got raided by the FBI. They're after the list." Rasheeda froze, the blood draining from her face. She had to move. The game had changed. The FBI was already on it. This was no longer just about taking down Brooks. It was about exposing the whole network before it disappeared into the shadows. She glanced over her shoulder at the mansion. They had no idea she was still alive, still breathing down their necks. Brooks had made his move. But Rasheeda would make hers, too. She was getting the truth out, no matter what it took. Rasheeda couldn't shake the adrenaline coursing through her veins as she crouched in the alley, staring at the flickering streetlights in the distance. The world seemed to be moving faster than she could keep up with, but her mind was focused. One way or another, she was going to end this. After everything she had uncovered, Hendricks, the real estate empire, the hate groups, and now Michael Foster, Rasheeda knew that if she didn't act quickly, the corruption would be swept under the rug. The FBI had raided Foster's office, but Rasheeda wasn't sure that would be enough. The people behind this operation were powerful, and they had the means to cover their tracks. She had to be the one to expose it. She dialed Sarah's number, her fingers tight around the phone. "Sarah, what's the latest? Where are we?" Sarah's voice came through quickly, but there was an edge to it. "Rasheeda, I've been digging into the list you sent me. We have the names, we have the connections. And it's worse than I thought. Foster's been in this from the beginning. But I don't think we can trust the FBI's raid. It's too clean, too perfect." Rasheeda's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this could be part of the plan," Sarah continued. "They could be trying to cover up the rest of the operation, making it look like the FBI's cleaning house when they're really just targeting the small players." Rasheeda took a deep breath. "So what do? We need to go public. We need to get the press involved before they can silence us. I'm already contacting a few reporters who can help. But you have to go to the courthouse, Rasheeda. We've got the proof. We need to act now." Rasheeda nodded even though Sarah couldn't see her. "All right. I'll get there." The courthouse was busy, but it wasn't the chaos of the law that held Rasheeda's attention. It was the quiet intensity of what was about to happen. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. She wasn't just taking down a man. She was taking down a system, a network of hate, corruption, and greed. And she wasn't going to let them win. She met Sarah outside the courthouse, her breath steady despite the tension in the air. Sarah was already talking to a few journalists, key players who had the reach to make sure the story went public, no matter how hard they tried to bury it. "We're going to do this right, Rasheeda," Sarah said as she handed her a small folder. "You've got everything you need. The documents, the list, the photos. All of it's going public. They won't be able to stop us." Rasheeda felt a sense of calm wash over her. It was now or never. As they made their way inside, Rasheeda took a deep breath and walked toward the press room. Reporters were milling around, preparing for their stories. It was time. She stepped forward, holding up the folder for everyone to see. "I have evidence," Rasheeda's voice rang out, cutting through the noise. "Evidence that ties Jonathan Brooks, Michael Foster, and others to a large-scale operation involving hate groups and real estate manipulation. I have proof of money laundering, coordinated attacks, and the systematic displacement of entire communities." The room fell silent. All eyes were on her. "I'm here to expose the truth," she continued, her voice steady. "We have names, we have connections, and we have the power to take this down. But it's up to all of you to make sure this story gets out. We can't let them get away with this." There was a pause, and then a barrage of questions erupted from the reporters. Rasheeda answered them all, her confidence growing with each word. She had the evidence, the witnesses, and the will to fight. Later that evening, as Rasheeda watched the news coverage unfold on her television, she felt a mix of relief and disbelief. The media had picked up the story. It was all over the headlines, the corruption, the conspiracy, the political ties. And, most importantly, it wasn't being swept under the rug. The reporters had dug into Brooks' financials, traced the dirty money, and connected the dots between the real estate empire and the hate groups. Michael Foster had been arrested on charges of conspiracy and money laundering. Brooks, too, was facing charges, and his empire was crumbling. Hendricks Construction was being investigated for its role in the operation, and the corrupt officials who had helped cover it all up were now under scrutiny. Rasheeda sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of the battle slowly lift off her shoulders. She had fought for justice, and she had won. The fight wasn't over, of course. There were still battles to be fought, still work to be done to ensure that the system was truly held accountable. But today, Rasheeda had made a difference. She had brought down the powerful, and she had done it the right way. Her phone buzzed, and she answered without hesitation. "Hey, Sarah. We did it." Sarah's voice was full of excitement. "You did it, Rasheeda. This is just the beginning. We've got a long way to go, but you changed everything today." Rasheeda smiled, feeling a rare moment of peace. "Yeah, we did. And it's only the start."